Awesome. So yes, so today what we want to do is focus on, strengthening our reports and how we're documenting these incidents, whether it is a result of a play group. I'm going to primarily be focusing on that, but it kind of goes the same for if something happens outside of the play group and how we're utilizing that information in a way that increases, our pathway planning. It helps staff feel safe. It helps staff feel better about what's happened, and just making sure we have all of our I's dotted and our T's crossed as we move forward. So, incident reports are typically at most shelters that I've been to is maybe something that we're filling out specifically for disease control, right? So it might be, depending on the state, a report that needs to be documented and then sent out so that the CDC is aware that there was a dog bite. We know the dog has to be on a quarantine. In some states, a police officer might have to come out to on that 10th day to sign off that the dog is not showing signs of rabies, right? So we have these kind of very clear forms for certain shelters in certain states across the country that need to fill these out for disease transmission reasons. And then in other states, what we might also see is, or yeah, for disease transmission, but in other states, what we might also see is workers' comp. So that's a separate form. So if somebody was injured during some type of incident or behavior, dog fight or behavior event, whatever it may occur, we might have to have a form filled out for workers' compensation. And then if it was a volunteer, we may need to do something with that for our insurance purposes, right? So there's all these forms that are legal and logistical and need to be filled out. And I think it becomes a lot of paperwork. So one thing to say, first of all, is if you have really well-run shelters where you've got a lot of safety protocols in place, the usage of these forms tends to be really rare. And what I have seen happen is that all of a sudden there is an incident and nobody knows what form is supposed to be filled out and by who. Making sure that that is part of your SOPs and documentation as far as like who's supposed to fill out what forms for what is really important. But all of the legal and all that stuff aside, or all of the logistical or whatever, the other piece of it is figuring out the behavior pieces of what happened and then what do we do with that information. So when I look a lot of these dog bite forms, whether it's from a play group or whether it's from an incident that happened at the shelter, it's like, was there a person bit? Did they need medical attention? And the form itself is relatively basic and doesn't actually give us a ton of data for what really happened. So when I started in dog daycare, we actually never documented incidents. It might be like a verbal thing, or maybe there was an email, that might have been sent to the owner of the dog from the daycare. But coming from as I moved through that system and becoming a manager, I realized that if I wasn't on site, I wanted to have a relatively clear idea of what had happened, and like how bad was the person injured, etc. So there's a lot that needs to go into these types of incident reports that really can give somebody looking back what actually happened. Yes, we can always stash and store video, but often in shelters, we don't have video. We don't, many shelters do not have a video looking in their play yard. If we're lucky, sometimes we'll have a video of like a hallway or maybe a lobby or a meet and greet room or something like that, but we don't often have videos in the kennel area. And I actually got video from one shelter where they had a video in every single kennel, which was amazing, but I had never seen a shelter do that before. So we need to kind of have every angle because if we want to look at what happened from a behavioral perspective, it's really important to, really be able to identify like what happened and what was maybe leading up to what happened, and then also like what next steps we should take. So I thought it would be fun to share a version of a incident report that I've put together, that I think kind of covers a whole bunch of the different things. So let me pull that up for you guys so we can walk through it together. And this is going to be on, of course, I have like 15 different windows open on my computer. So give me one second. Here we go. Dogfight incident report. So hopefully you guys can see that. So first of all, in our incident report, we want to do the obvious. So date, time, location. And this report is specific to a dog to dog altercation in in a play group. So obviously this is something that you can potentially modify if we wanted to either have one specific for dog fights in the play yard, or we wanted to have just a generic incident report for like bites in the shelter. But this one is specifically for play group. But I kind of want to know pretty quickly from top down perspective for this one, which we just had somebody enter. This is a dog fight incident report. What type of incident happened? So why am I looking for incidents even if there was no contact made, right? So the first thing I have on here is a verbal argument. This may not be as relevant for your shelter, but for some shelters it might be. So I left it in there because sometimes verbal arguments or verbal spats can get pretty intense. Like I like to kind of I call it the Lion King when it's like Mufasa and Scar fighting. They're like up on their hind ends and they're kind of like throwing punches and like screaming at each other. I might call that a verbal argument. There's maybe no contact made, but it got pretty icky and it had to be broken up with some type of intervention, whether that was, hopefully not you wouldn't go to an air horn for that type of thing, but you had to either yell or spray water or do some type of intervention. And so that's really important because one thing is it tells me both dogs have a lot of bite inhibition and that didn't escalate to an actual fight. I think that that's a good thing to document. Because I think that that actually shows a lot of behavioral resilience. So yeah, so even though it didn't escalate into something big, like it's actually still giving me a lot of behavioral information. A scuffle is going to be something where the dogs are actually tussling a little bit. There's probably some teeth in there. They're making a lot of physical contact, but it's able to be interrupted relatively easily, and there's no real biting involved. We still, again, want to be able to document these things. Maybe we don't necessarily have a full report that we're doing that for, but we're going to want to put it somewhere in our computer system or tracking systems as far as like an occurrence that happened. Again, because it's giving us information. Two dogs that got into a fight and nobody got hurt and it was broken up pretty easily. Really great. Again, showing us a lot of inhibition. But does that mean we need to then continue to monitor those dogs in a play group? Because if two or three or four more scuffles happen, we're trending more likely to putting the dog back in an environment where they're going to increase the likelihood of a dog biting at that point. So, really important to get those things documented, get information about how it happened, who was involved, all of that. So, I think really once we get to the scuffle portion, that's where we should really consider doing some more hefty documentation on our end so that we can prevent the dog or prevent putting the dog back in a situation in which they're likely to replicate it. And then we have maybe like a one-sided attack. So this could be where like um a great example is you bring a dog into the yard, there's a couple other dogs, and all of a sudden, um, male dog walks by an unaltered male dog, and one of them attacks the other for no reason other than the sex hormones, right? That would be a one-sided attack. We definitely absolutely want to get something like that documented where there's like a really true aggressor and a true victim. We want to make sure we're doing that. If there's a fight, that now we're talking about like a contact between both dogs, possible bites, potential injuries. It's hard to separate. We have to physically intervene. That is kind of how I differentiate between scuffle and a fight. Is a scuffle is normally easy to break up with some type of tool or a pet corrector or something like that. In a fight, we're talking about air horn, we're talking about having to get our hands involved, etc. So once we've moved from scuffle into fight, that is something that I think should be documented in the database. And with this is definitely getting into where I'd put like incident report territory, even if there wasn't any major injury, because I want to have it on the record for that animal that these circumstances kind of led to this fight. And I want to state too that it shouldn't necessarily be oh, this dog had an incident report filled out. It should be like this dog is having trouble and maybe play groups is not the right space, or maybe whatever scenario led up to this. Because I think when we're only filling out incident reports when something really, really bad happened, then people get really worried about it being this huge red flag on a dog's record when it really should just be utilized as data. And if we're using them regularly for things that aren't crazy egregious, then it doesn't seem like such a big deal for it to be on there. It's more just like a red flag, not a red flag, like a flag on their record that there's something that, we might need to do to accommodate that dog better. So So yeah, so these are all reasons of like why. And then of course, if there is a latching incident. So, the type of incident's important. So if it could just be a one-sided attack because the dog got loose in a kennel and then they started fighting through the kennel bars. If we're not looking at it as a dog fight in a play group and we're looking at it this is an incident report with a person to dog. So it could be somebody reaching for a ball out of a dog's mouth and they got bit or something like that. All it's doing is giving us a lot of context to what happens so we can then utilize that information to move forward. So what do I really want to know about these is who are the people that were there, who witnessed it, who saw it, what was their role in the situation. Again, this is a playgroup report, so I have playgroup role here. That may not necessarily matter. And then if there is a fight, we want to kind of know who all the animals that were involved and kind of what their role was in that. And then that's where we get into the injuries. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not often that I will see these more formal reports that are meant to go either to the local health department or are going to animal control so they can monitor quarantine. It might just say like skin was broken and that's it. So when I, as a external behavior consultant, would come into a shelter and ask for information about a dog bite that maybe happened 5 or 6 months ago, and I get handed this piece of paper that just has vague information and that there was skin broken, but doesn't tell me anything else about it. It's really hard for me to judge about like what had happened, how bad was the skin broken, what type of a bite was it, etc. So really being able to document those injuries, describing kind of the bite level. So you may want to use like the Ian Dunbar bite scale. You might want to use for plaguers, maybe the Kara Shannon bite scale, but this will give some hindsight for somebody coming in down the road. And for shelters, what I think of is a dog who's adopted and then potentially returned. And this is another area where, maybe a dog had been there previously. Maybe there was an incident that happened at the shelter, or there was a dog bite, or there was a dog fight, etc. And then that dog gets adopted and leaves for 2 years. They come back with maybe some challenges, other things that their owners or now surrenders are telling us, and then we go back in the system and we see that there was also something that had happened originally at our shelter, and all we have is a piece of paper that says there was a dog fight but like nothing else, right? So I think when we're in the shelter we always want to think about once this dog leaves they're going to be happy in their home forever, but we do need to remember that in 3, 4, 5 years there may still be staff at the shelter that are re-receiving this dog back. So I've seen that happen as well. I mean, again, it's just good to kind of have that information that can be really helpful. So yeah, so then of course we want to look at any canine injuries. I did a really cool, I don't know if you're in Michael Shikashio's group at all. I actually just did a presentation on assessing dog to dog bites, which was a really fun one for me and one I wanted to do for a long time. And so, he has that in his, I don't know if he sells those on his website or whatever, but the in canine to canine injuries are a little bit different than people to dogs, or I guess dogs to people. We shouldn't be injuring dogs. So yeah, so being able to look at what that looked like. And then we want to know what the post-fight actions and behavior was, for both the dogs and our staff. So in this specific report, this is based on play group. So it's like, here's the dog name that was involved, right? So if we listed every dog involved, like what did we do? Did they get a timeout? Did we have to rotate dogs through the group? Were we doing decompression time? Pull them out of the group to do decompression, recovery group? Did we have to isolate them? How long did it take for them to recover? So this is something really critical that tells us a lot about that dog's behavioral um, resilience. If they were like the victim and they were freaked out and now we had to separate them, like how long does it take for them to kind of come back to like non-panicking or back to kind of a baseline? If it's a dog who is the aggressor, I also really want to know how long did it take them to get back to their baseline? Because if we break up this fight that happened and that dog is looking for the other dog for longer than a minute, or I would say even for longer than 30 seconds, and they're like strategically looking to figure out where that other dog is, that's a cause for concern. So that after the fight is going to be a really, really important part. And where you're going to want to gather that data on like what led up to the fight, that's going to come from all of your witness statements. So I think I have them. Yes. Okay. So it's under here. So incident statements. should include like what was going on before that happened. And it's going to be the same thing. So if you're outside of like I said, outside of a play group and we're actually in a kennel, or maybe there's a meet and greet and the dog, growled at somebody, or the dog, I don't know, was in an office and sort of resource guarding a bully stick. These are things that we want to just note and indicate somewhere. So we might not need a full-blown incident report. However, I don't want my colleague down the hall from me to take the same dog out tomorrow and bring that dog to her office and then give the dog a bully stick. And then we have two incidents and we've just further reinforced that resource guarding behavior. So being able to kind of ensure that we're documenting it and documenting the lead up, what happened, and then immediately following. So, for example, what I would want to document in that case, if I went to grab a bully stick and the dog looked up, gave me hard eye contact, and growled, I want to document those pieces. But then what did I do to get rid of the bully stick, or get the dog away from the bully stick? So did I have to like leave the room, or did I grab a treat and I toss it away and was able to pick it up and the dog was like, "Oh, I forgot the bully stick even existed." Or did I try to trade with the dog and they were like, no? Or maybe I was able to trade with the dog, took the bully stick, but then they were freaking out looking for it afterwards. Like, again, so we're learning about how that dog recovers from a stressful incident and also how they navigate that stressful incident. And that information can be really helpful to not only handle that animal for the in-person, in-shelter care, but it's also very helpful for us when we're doing any potential adoption counseling. So, and we don't have to tell people, and I always go back to this of like, this dog resource guards, or this dog XYZ, or this is what you're going to need to do at home when this dog this. What we want to make sure that we're doing in our adoption counseling, utilize the information that we're gathering from these types of reports, is saying, this is what happened in this specific circumstance. I had the dog in my office, or the dog was in our manager's office, and she had given him a high value item. It was a bully stick. A lot of people actually don't know what bully sticks are if you're not in the dog world. So you may want to elaborate on it, etc. And then just say, so when they went to reach for that, the dog growled and made eye contact, and the manager was able to trade that for another item easily, and then the dog went to lay down and it wasn't a problem after that, but we wanted to let you know. So we're not really telling adopters what it's going to look like in their home, because we can't really predict the future. We can only tell them about what we saw, what we witnessed, and paint that picture for them so they can then take that and then visualize what it might look like in their home. And I think that's a really important way to go about talking about a lot of the behaviors we see in the shelter, because unless we have the data from a previous home that was like the dog resource guarded everything, we should probably consider not maybe the placeability of that dog, but we don't want to, there's so much stress in the environment in the shelter that it's really hard to just say that the dog is going to do this here if we don't have that previous data. So when we're doing adoption counseling and talking to our adoption counselors about how to then do adoption counseling, it's important that we talk to them about painting the picture versus saying the dog is going to do this or not. So yeah, I can actually share it with you. Hold on. That's what I probably should have done so you could pull it up on your computer. Thanks, Rebecca. Here. You can make a copy of it if you want as well. You can't edit the document directly, but you can certainly use that. So yeah, like I said, this is certainly I made this one for play groups, but I think it goes across the board as far as making sure that we are taking all of the information available to us and having it written down. And I know it takes time and it can be a pain in the butt. So depending on your staffing, how often you're having stuff, like if you're in a shelter that has 200 to 300 dogs, you're probably having incidents multiple times a week, especially if you're trying to document stuff that's as low level as, growling or something like dog got loose and like lunged at another dog or like something like that. So you may not need a full-blown incident report, but you may want to have shelter love now. And I think Pet Point does too. You can modify the templates and make custom ones. So you can maybe do like a minor incident and major incident or something like that. And that way it can just if it's just a small incident, they can just write some really baseline details about what happened and what occurred and maybe the FAS score. I did another live not too long ago about just how I love using the FAS scoring charts and asking people just to input that because it's really quick. And if you've got the FAS charts from fear-free shelters, around your shelter, people can say, oh, this dog was at a 4 when this happened. This makes sense. So, you can utilize that to make it really quick and easy. And then when we have something where there's been actually tooth contact on skin, and that should be recorded, even if a dog doesn't break skin, that is a bite still. Of course, not if it was accidental. Like there's definitely some things like you went to grab a toy and the dog went to grab the toy at the same time and your hand happened to be there. Like those things do happen, but I often see in shelters like a lot of the precursors to dogs escalating to a bite happen when, they might jump up and kind of grab and they're like, oh yeah, well, he was just overexcited. But dogs are pretty intentional. They put their mouths, so we shouldn't discount a bite just because it didn't break skin, as not having not happened. So yeah, so having those kind of like lower level incidents documented can be really helpful. So if I, for example, as a behavior consultant was coming into a shelter and we're like, oh, we're having trouble with this dog, blah, 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 blah. And there's been like 5 or 6 of these incidents where the dog got over aroused and like jumped up and like grabbed somebody's arm and they were able to like be like, hey, knock it off. And the dog gets off. Like, and that's not documented somewhere. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, like the dog bit somebody and landed a level 3 bite. And it seems out of nowhere, but it might be because all these other incidents happen where the dog just hadn't escalated to that point of biting yet. Yeah. So really important because if this dog had bitten somebody 6 times and hadn't broken skin and we didn't do an intervention before it got to that level 3, that we weren't making that intervention sooner. So I just think it's really important to get that kind of documentation in there. I think the other piece of it, as I move on from this, the other piece that's really important is we're teaching our staff and our volunteers how to document things in an objective fashion. So I can usually read through the lines at this point where I can read somebody's relatively subjective illustration of what happened. But it can be really challenging because people have different, as you all know, people have different meanings behind like, oh, the dog was angry or the dog looked frustrated or they got really aggressive with me. And again, if I'm reading through some documentation and I don't have that volunteer or that staff member there to ask those prying questions to try to get a little bit more meat in the details there, it's really hard because then I have to try to make some assumptions about what was actually going on. So if we start talking and helping and hosting either webinars or we could do like monthly lunch and learn type of things or pre-record stuff that volunteers can watch with the volunteer coordinator on how to write notes in a way that is objective and says, I went to go put the leash on Rover and he turned around and gave me some eye contact, and I removed my hand because I felt like he was going to bite me. Like that is much more helpful than I went to leash Rover and he got aggressive, and like that is just a lot more helpful. So making sure that we're not adding in a lot of unnecessary anecdotal or anthropomorphized detail, and we're really focusing on painting that picture of I want to be able to visualize what that meant. So for some of these incident reports, what you can do is also, especially if you have a big shelter where that type of training is just, a very hard reach. You've got a lot of new volunteers, you got a lot of people walking dogs. You may want to take your reports and simplify them down that has some already chosen language to utilize. So you could say, in the moment that the event occurred, the dog was displaying these behaviors, and then you can list a whole bunch, and then it can be like growl, hard stare, head whip towards me, that kind of thing. And then they can go through and circle. So at least when you're reading it, somebody else is reading it, and we're looking back, or maybe we're in a pathways meeting or an outcomes discussion. We can look back at these and say, okay, like there was a head whip. There was a head whip with contact made. There was fixation on the dog after the reactive episode, and the dog had a hard time letting it go because that's like circled. You could have like how long did it take the dog to calm down after whatever the incident was, and it's like immediately 30 seconds, took 2 minutes, never calmed down, had to return a kennel, etc. So like having some of these things just already written out can be very helpful for that. So for those larger shelters, that can be super helpful. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. So how does strong reporting support the staff leadership and the animals? I think it really helps getting everybody on the same page. So if everybody is familiar with these forms, how to read them, how to fill them out, I think it can just be really helpful because, we're all communicating in the same way across the board. And then again, when we're coming to these pathway or intervention, right? So when I talk about pathways, I'm not talking just outcome. I'm talking about in-shelter interventions that we're trying if we're discovering a dog is having some additional stress or challenges, is those are the intervention pathways that we're trying to utilize to move this dog to a positive outcome. We're going to want to utilize that information. And so if everybody who's in the room looking at it reads the same thing and can interpret the same way, it's taking out a lot of that subjectivity, a lot of the emotions that can go into it. And so that can just be really, really helpful. So if somebody is able to recognize that, yeah, this dog kind of snapped and bit and made contact with somebody's skin, but they didn't break the skin. They recovered right away. They showed affiliation afterwards. There was a resource present. Like it just helps people be on that same page, and that can be really helpful. The other thing that it can do is identify when things are really scary for a staff member or volunteer. And we may see something that had occurred, and we can be like, wow, that actually was probably pretty traumatic, and maybe we should check in with that person as the leader, as either the volunteer coordinator or as the behavior manager or the animal care, whoever it is, can go and check in with that person and make sure that they're okay and they feel like they have the support. Oftentimes with especially all of us who are in this field and are really hard, in that way we're like, no, I'm fine. It's like people are usually fine like right after it happens. And sometimes it like I know for me too, like the um impacts of it don't happen until later. And I might be fine initially because my adrenaline is there, all that, and then a week later I'm feeling like, was it my fault? Like maybe I did something wrong. Especially if there's a bad outcome from it, it's your regret and all these things. So like having that onto your radar when you see an incident that's pretty bad, you can then check in with that person. So that is also going to help with your leadership and support for your staff and team members, which, as many of you know, like in this field, is really tough. We all go through so much, and shelter changes every day, and it's kind of like this big old roller coaster, and it's really easy to forget. Like today, something that happened last week. So I started using these reports. I started utilizing these reports, to schedule a reminder on my calendar to like check in with some of my team members after a few days, just to see that like latent response of stress from specific incidents. Alicia's asking, what do you think about reaching out even for minor bites, reaching out for all of them? Yeah, I think that's going to depend on your staff. And it might even depend on your staff member. Folks who have been in it for a while may not necessarily need for the minor stuff, but I have found I think over the last couple of years, we have a lot of staff coming in that have a lot of the social media influencer idea of like what working in an animal shelter is like until reality hits them, and they may not be prepared for something. So I know for myself personally, like when I got into animal welfare, I was very gritty, and I was one of those people who was able to just jump in and break up a dog fight really quickly at the daycare I worked at, and I was like walking difficult dogs at the county shelter, and being bit was really the last thing I was ever concerned about. And if a dog bit me, I was just like, well, I shouldn't have done what I did, And I think a lot of us have that mentality, but I also think that because in general, like social media, like sheltering is so out there now, like the expectations might be a little bit different. And I don't think that's anybody's fault. I think it's just for a lot of folks, I've seen a lot more nervousness around dogs. I also do think that part of this is the awareness of stress. I think we've done a great job in sheltering of making people aware of fear, anxiety, and stress and how it can affect dogs. And we show them this stress escalation chart. And, I think we sometimes because we have so much knowledge now, we're teaching people these things. It almost creates this like fear that, So anyway, long story short, I think there are some folks who need additional support in ways that I would have never needed earlier in my career, but it's different now because of the way that people enter the field now, I think. It doesn't mean that there's not still crazy people like me or anybody else out there, but I definitely feel that there are some folks who see the FAS chart and are really proactive about keeping stress low. So then when they see that high level of stress, it's not even the physicality of it. It's like the emotional piece of like, I can't believe an animal got that stressed, right? It's not even that they're scared of the impact to themselves, but it's traumatizing. It can be traumatizing in the way that you saw an animal also experiencing trauma. I kind of went through that a couple weeks ago with the German Shepherd case. I had 5 days of watching dogs who were just like at that FAS 4 to 5 high peak of stress. And that impacted me, I think, more afterwards than I noticed was happening in the moment because I was so focused on fixing it and trying to help reduce their stress. So, the impact of that hit me a lot later. Let's see. Yeah. Yeah, Alicia, I think that that's a tough one. That's a really, that can be very traumatizing having a staff member. Yep. So if you're not in the comments, Alicia's asking that she had a staff member bitten on the neck recently, and I reached out to her and she never replied. She won't walk any dogs and is becoming afraid of them. Do you ever reach out again or do you just leave it alone? I think in that situation, if you've reached out and they haven't replied, I would probably, I don't know what the time framing is on that. That is a conversation in which I think it depends on your role. So if she is not doing if she is unable to complete tasks that she needs to be able to do because of this incident, I think some type of assistive intervention can be there to say, how can we support you and what support can we provide you to feel comfortable and safe doing these roles in your job? So that could be providing an extra like a walkie-talkie. It could be provided, making sure that there's safety tools. It could be that for a couple weeks they have a person with them. It could be maybe they just transition away from walking dogs into doing an enrichment program. I think one of the worst things we can do is like, oh, you can't do your job anymore, so like bye. Like sometimes if we still have somebody dedicated to helping, they just can't do a specific task anymore. We can pivot them to something different, almost like an injury, right? So if somebody breaks their leg and they're going to be off feet off their actually my sister just broke her ankle and she rides horses for a living. She trains horses and teaches lessons, and so she can't do that for 6 months. And so she's gonna have to do other jobs around the barn and do some assistive work. So it might just be something where you pull that person from that role for a little while and then ease them back into it, just like you would with a physical injury. But yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think it's worth checking in with them again. And if you're the manager and like this is a paid employee, definitely coming with a supportive ideas, and not treating trauma as something bad, just treating it just like it's any other injury that we have to help and work around. With that being said, if it's somebody who's, maybe a volunteer or something like that, there's always ways to pivot them in those roles. It's just a volunteer, but I do a lot of bite reach outs. Yeah, no, it's definitely volunteers are definitely the heartbeat of the shelter. And again, they're not there like 24/7 like a lot of us are in shelters. So it's something that can be even more harmful because unlike us, maybe we get bit or somebody growls at us and it's like, okay, well, I'm back in tomorrow morning and, I'm back with the hands on the dogs. And, you realize that it's like one out of every 600 incidents, something not great happens. But for somebody who's a volunteer and is only coming in to do like 3 or 4 dogs a week, or whatever, that's probably going to be a lot more impactful because they don't have as much hands-on. And for something as serious as that, like that's pretty intense. Like I've never even had a dog come at me like that, and I've been doing this for like a very long time now. So, I don't know what that would do to me even. So yeah, I don't know. I would tread lightly with that one, but if you can figure out a way to support them and proactively pivot them to other tasks, I think that would probably be helpful for them to keep them in the system and helping and being there for support, but not putting them in direct. Yeah, they could be somebody that maybe does playgroup observations and documentation or something like that. Like that might be fun because they can watch dogs playing and being social and happy if you run playgroups at your shelter. That might be a good one. Awesome. Okay, so let's circle back a little bit. So we talked about supporting staff. We just talked a lot about, Alicia's challenge with this one volunteer who just had a major traumatic incident happen and how we can kind of support them. So just some ideas to get you thinking outside of the box and how we're able to utilize all of this the way that we're documenting and we're handling these incidents to our benefit and for future staff training and all of that stuff. I mean, I think having some type of a how do we follow up with people after an incident is something that we can think about proactively and be like, what options do we have? Like a lot of shelters have access to the Calm app. Some shelters have access to compassion fatigue specialists. Some folks have at shelters have like the first responder helplines. Like there's all sorts of ways that we can give people uh immediately after an incident, especially once it's like one of those really more severe ones, really bad dog fight, we can give them some supportive services so they don't have to tell anybody out the shelter that they're having challenges. They can just kind of take that and do that on their own. And for some people, that's actually better. Yeah. And then I think what's also really great to kind of wrap this up a little bit is once you've gotten some of these systems in place and we're documenting things and we have a lot more I don't know. We have a lot more of an understanding of what's going on in the boots on the ground type of stuff, whether it's through minor templates or actual incident reports, is we can actually start a spreadsheet. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but I really like data. But we can start really documenting how often certain things are occurring because that can help us direct resources to where we need it for staff training, for environmental stuff. So if we all of a sudden recognize that we're having a lot of dog fights happening by a specific gate in a yard, maybe we can change the way that that gate functions so it's less of a hot spot. If we have a dog in a certain corner in a kennel area where that kennel particularly seems to have a lot of incidents around it, no matter what dog gets put in it, we can make some environmental changes. Maybe it's, when we're putting harnesses on dogs, right? Like it's so good to have that data, and that kind of goes back all the way to like why I'm a nerd about this stuff. Because when I worked at the daycare earlier in my career for about 5 years, and then well, yeah, so it was about 5 years, and we were roughly having like 12 to 15 fights a month. And I started after working there for about a year and a half, I started really documenting like where they were happening, what was the cause of them, etc. And I started seeing trends and I was like, well, they're all happening. Most of them are happening in the morning. A lot of it's when we're integrating dogs, like as they're coming in. They're more frequent around heavy holiday seasons. And we were able to start really like changing the way that we ran our operations based on all of the information that I started documenting in a spreadsheet on what was going on, and it allowed us to then reduce over time our dog fights and incidents from like 12 a month to about two, which is like crazy, right? That's like 10 less incidents a month over a year. That's like 120. Uh, right? Is that? I don't know. I can't count. Yeah, 120. And then as far as dog bites go, we also reduce staff injuries because the less dog fights there are to break up, the less staff have to be sent over to urgent care. So, in general, it's just really good to track this stuff. So, even if nothing crazy occurred and there wasn't actually like skin breaking, it's still good to track the information as it's coming in and utilize that to make our lives safer. And reality is if there's a lot of dog fights happening or dog bites happening, it's because the animals are under stress. So if we can start to understand where the areas in our shelter are that are giving our animals stress, we can then turn around and make changes. And then that means if we're not getting a lot of bites, it means the animals are under less stress. So all good things. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Oh, as somebody who just came into the room, that's a bummer. I gotta head out now, but I will be posting this. I can actually edit it right now and get it back up into the Facebook group. And I will make sure that I post the link for the dogfight SOP into the into the Facebook group as well, or the incident report. Yeah. So thank you guys so much for joining today. I look forward to seeing you again next week. I will be doing another live, and then after speaking with my Brittany, we realized that I'm going to be really traveling for like 2 to 3 weeks, kind of back to back. So instead of doing lives, I might actually replay some old episodes in 30 time frame or pre-record some stuff for you guys. Because she was like, please don't kill yourself by trying to do lives while also flying. And I'm like, that's great. That's a great idea. So I might do that. So if you guys don't see me on and off the next couple months or couple weeks, that's why. But I will try to make sure I get you guys some good information so it's not just me canceling all the time because I don't like doing that. All right, well, I hope you have a good rest of your week and a good weekend, and I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.